If you've just clicked on this podcast, what is one thing about dreams that most people don't know that can radically change their lives?
I mean, I think that dreams are communication from the rest of us, from the parts of ourselves that we don't necessarily acknowledge all of the time. Sometimes we call it the unconscious. And the thing about the unconscious is that it doesn't necessarily know something better than our consciousness, but it certainly has a different perspective. It certainly sees things really differently. And so the wonderful gift of dreams is that it can introduce us to that different perspective. And if you think about it, so much of what is helpful in life comes from an ability to gain a different perspective. Different things can give us that perspective, that kind of perspectival shift. Traveling can do that. Reading a really good novel can do that. Um, but dreams can also do that, and they come free of charge every night.
Yeah, provided you get a good night's sleep.
Yeah, yes, which is not always so easy.
That's
That's true.
that's a task in itself. Are dreams more than just random encrypted messages? We have daydreams, dreams of our future life, the vision we see ourselves in the future. We have waking dreams, and we have dreams at night, from fantasy to nightmare. How can we start to uncode and unlock what these dreams actually mean to our psyche and soul? I'm Gareth Catesy, the host of the Microdose podcast, where we speak about the intersection between flow, psychedelics, performance, and leadership. This week, I'm so excited to bring on our guest, Lisa Marchiano, who is a Jungian analyst. She's also the host of This Jungian Life, a podcast with more than 10 million downloads, and she's an award winning author. She's just written a new book called Dreamwise. She also has another book called The Vital Spark. But this conversation is really about how do we unlock the meaning of our dreams and how can we practically apply this insights that we get from these myths, stories, visions, and random wild hallucinations we find ourselves in the dream world. Who and what is the Dreammaker, and how can we start to apply the insights into our life in a pragmatic way that betters how we show up in the world? I hope you enjoy this week's show as much as I enjoyed having Lisa on the podcast. Thank you so much for watching and supporting, and enjoy the show. I'd love to talk about what the unconscious is, the kind of value of valuing, I guess, altered states and different perspectives, and looking at like monophasic views of how we view the world and reality versus polyphasic, and how that goes across culturally. But before we dive in, I just want to kind of explore you a bit. And you're a Jungian analyst. You've just written a book called Dreamwise.
Mhm.
I just Before we go into dreams, what is your kind of credits to, I guess, have written a whole book about dreams, and what is a Jungian analyst, and what drew you to dream
Mhm.
work and this
Mhm.
kind of work?
Yeah.
Maybe you can also explain your work you do. Yeah.
So as you said, I'm a Jungian analyst, and Jungian analysts are therapists who have a mental health license most of the time, who have gone on to get further training in the ideas and approaches that were pioneered by Carl Jung. Carl Jung was a Swiss psychiatrist. He was a contemporary of Freud. He was junior to Freud by some number of years, but the two men knew each other and collaborated closely together in the beginning of the 20th century, before they had a significant break and kind of went their own way. So, Jung was part of that initial circle who pioneered psychoanalysis, but his ideas differed a little bit from Freud's in that he was very interested in the function of meaning in people's lives. He says, we cannot man cannot stand a meaningless life. He saw that a lot of people that came to him were suffering
Mm.
from a lack of meaning. So his approach to mental distress was much more, I want to say, psychospiritual than Freud's. He really believed that everyone kind of came into the world with a blueprint for wholeness, that we're growing always at all points in our lives toward greater wholeness, and that symptoms can develop when that process kind of gets interrupted. He was very, very interested in the unconscious, as we're all depth uh,
Mm.
therapists. But he really saw that the unconscious wasn't just a place for repressed and forgotten things, but could also be generative. It could give rise to new ideas and new attitudes and new experiences. And so he valued the unconscious and felt that dreams obviously were one of the main ways that we communicate with the unconscious, and that the unconscious communicates with us.
Mm.
So one of the major ideas in Jung's work is this notion of cultivating a relationship with the unconscious. Sometimes it's referred to as the ego self axis, an axis along which our conscious personality, the ego, can have communication with the deep guiding self. And dreams are a major, major way that this happens.
Well, yeah, it's very interesting because it seems like we are currently, I don't know if maybe since the dawn of time, but more so now than ever, it feels like there's a bit of a meaning crisis. And like
Yes.
meaning, like in Jamie Wheel's work, like meaning 1.0 was fundamental religion. And, if that floats your boat, that gets you through. And there's obviously like deep myth and archetypal stuff to pull from there, other than the fact that it could fundamentally be real. And then we've got meaning 2.0, which is liberalism and rationalism, and this like new pull towards science and the reduction of everything and the loss of myth and stories. And
Hmm.
I think for a lot of us, we're kind of like sitting in the middle. And I think as a young person in the world, it's very easy to be alert to that it's meaningless or pointless, or that there's not meaning and value to my life. So as someone like operating in a world, like part of the work with Jung, at least from, I mean, I've tried to read Jung's books, but I've learned more from the analyst because it's quite cryptic.
Yeah.
And as much as I'd love to think I can wrap my head around it, it's way much more
Yeah. Yeah.
digestible when someone explains it to me. But a lot of it's weighed on like this knowledge and pull back into myth that you draw on. And what's kind of lost in modern times is this sharing of myth. And so what I wanted to kind of get to there was what was the ideas with yeah, how as a modern person would it seem beneficial to find meaning through my unconscious? And what is the kind of difference between the conscious and the unconscious? And yeah, how do we start to make meaning? Yeah,
Well,
it's a bit
one
of a
of the
question.
things I think, and this is back where dreams come in, is
Mm.
that, talking about these different meaning systems that kind of come from the outside. So whether it's traditional religion or maybe a kind of political belief system, it's external to us. The thing about dreams and images that come from our dreams is that um, it's from us. Sometimes you have a dream that is profoundly moving. It
Mm.
may be difficult even to put into words, but it's a dream that shakes you to your foundation. And it's an experience. And you may not know what it means, but you know it's incredibly
Mm.
meaningful. You know it's important. And it comes from within. So there's a way I think that dreams are the kind of source of religious experience and meaning. And it's not hypothetical. It's not written in some book somewhere. It didn't happen to someone else 2,000 years ago. It happened to you last night in your dream.
Yeah, it seems. Yeah, it would be worth, I think, just to back up a touch and maybe define a dream because it's such a loosely used word, right? We've got daydreaming, we've got the dream for ourselves. I
Hmm.
believe in a dream, like this collective
Hmm.
dream. Then we've got, um, lucid dreams, wet dreams, nightmares. So, there's such a big word to this thing where you can have this daydream internal visual and then obviously like it's generally referring in dream work to the dreams, I'm assuming, when you fall asleep. But I
Yes.
just thought, how do you define a dream? Is it something outside of normal waking consciousness, or is it something far deeper?
Well, I mean, I think I am referring specifically to the dreams that happen to us when we're asleep, usually in
Mm,
REM sleep, although you don't always dream in REM. You can dream outside of REM too, but the most vivid dreams, it seems, occur when we're in REM sleep, and we all dream every night. That's what the sleep research tells us, although, many of us don't remember that many
mm,
dreams. But, those dreams can be. Uh, they can be very, very frightening, and then we call them nightmares. But they are not a product of consciousness at all. I mean, which is different from a daydream, which has sort of interjections of consciousness in it. It's a very different process, I think. The dream that comes at night is kind of a unique physiologic state that we're in, where we're kind of paralyzed so that we don't act out our dreams. And there's heightened activity in the visual centers of the brain when we're dreaming, and in the emotional systems of the brain as well. So it seems, as far as we can tell, that all mammals dream. There's some evidence that octopuses dream and spiders dream. So
mm,
it seems like this is an incredibly widespread adaptation among animal life, which has to indicate that there's something really valuable to it. If you think about it from an evolutionary standpoint, we go completely unconscious. We're so vulnerable, and then we have these wild and weird visions. There must be something going on that's really important about that for it to have persisted, and to come at such a cost and to be so widespread. So it is a kind of unique state, but it is definitely. There's very little input from consciousness unless you're lucid dreaming, which I think is kind of a different, a little bit of a different topic. But
mm.
the thing about dreams is that usually you wake up and you think that never in a million years could I have consciously thought of that. Right. So it really is far from consciousness. You have some
Mm,
strange encounter in your dream, and it's you wouldn't have thought of that consciously. Even if you tried to think of
mm.
something strange, you wouldn't have thought of that.
Yeah, it's very interesting because in the same way that we are hardwired to dream, and as you said, octopuses to, all these animals, there's also a hardwiring to seek altered states. And right, that might be the dolphins puffing on pufferfish to elephants getting drunk on I can't think of the plant, but there's something to humanity seeking altered states and visionary states, and there's obviously
Mhm.
like the plant medicine psychedelic
Mhm.
route to altered states, and then it seems like very devalued or um, kind of put down in a modern context. That's in the monophasic culture where it's not really valued so highly. So, was there an experience for you that drew you into, like, one day realizing there's so much more to this internal realm that I'm encountering, my unconscious, and that led you to inquire further?
I think you're right. I think that these states are generally devalued, although we're intensely interested in them too, aren't
Mm,
we? So it's sort of devalued, but at the same time, there's a kind of evergreen interest in them. I wouldn't really say there was some kind of awakening for me. I mean, my mother was very interested in dreams. She's very interested in Jungian psychology, and I think probably both just through her, but also maybe just temperamentally, I was always kind of interested and open in that way. And so when I go back and I look at my earliest journals, I'm often recording dreams. So I think there was just kind of always an interest there.
mm. It's I wasn't planning on bringing this up. I had such a strange. Never found the book again. And I read a book that said if you ever like become consciously aware that you're dreaming in your dream and you write something, the dream will answer back.
Mm,
And the first time, this is like I kind of got scared of a dream journal after this. This is like maybe close to a decade ago, and I
mm,
wrote like what was the meaning of life, and I basically woke up like shaking. And I was like, oh my God, that was too deep of a question. And I won't go into the whole depths of the other dream, but it was like one of those prolific, profound dreams where I was underneath the ocean and I realized my parents were there, but they weren't engaging with me. And I was like, this must be a dream. And all these ships were upside down in the ocean. And I wrote on the bottom of the ocean floor, like, will I be happy in my career, I think. And I shot out the ocean and kind of woke up. And then I was like, whoa, like that was um, very strange to say the least.
mm, mhm,
Um, yeah, so I wanted to pull back. In your book. You speak about the Dreammaker.
mhm.
Who and what is the Dreammaker?
Yeah. That is a term that we just sort of fell into using as we were writing, which I thought was
Mm,
so interesting. But I think it really speaks to the way that we see dreams, which is that, they are a product of this kind of inner intelligence. So, there's some intelligence in the psyche that creates these dreams. They're not random. I'm just going to read this favorite quote of mine because I think it kind of answers that question. Um, but when you look at dreams and you understand them, you see how brilliant and subtle and attuned they are. And you have this experience of knowing there's someone or something who's crafting these messages. So here's the
mm,
quote. This is Jung. In each of us there is another whom we do not know. He speaks to us in dreams and tells us how differently he sees us from the way we see ourselves. When, therefore, we find ourselves in a difficult situation to which there is no solution, he can sometimes kindle a light that radically alters our attitude, the very attitude that led us into the difficult situation. So there's so much in those
mm,
couple of sentences. But in each of us there is an other, and I think that's the dream maker, and he has something. We in the book, I think we
mm.
refer to it as it, but the dream maker has something to tell us, and strives to do so every night in dreams.
Do you think the Dreammaker is the soul or a higher self, or do you think it's
Well, I mean, in terms of the Jungian conception of the psyche, so
Mm,
soul has different meanings. It has a religious meaning. It has, but if I'm thinking specifically in terms of Jung's map of the soul and his notion of the psyche, I think that the Dreammaker is ultimately the self with a capital
mm,
S, which Jung used to describe the kind of guiding center of the personality that is so much bigger than ego. At one point, he said you might as well call it the divine within. So I think and people might disagree with me on this, by the way, but I think all dreams ultimately do come from the self.
yeah, there's some dreams where it feels obvious that it's coming from a higher place, and then there's others where you're like, gosh, I just watched too much of Mr. Robot or something, and it's really like almost like not a brainwashing, but like a programming that goes into your dream. I guess you kind of get aware of what you're digesting unconsciously, which is interesting. But yeah, I've lost my train of thought on the Dreammaker there. But there's something to, because another one of my favorite Jung quotes is, the I'm paraphrasing, but like the purpose of being is to kindle a light in the
Hmm.
mere darkness of being, and that is one I think about a lot because, um, yeah, there is definitely a voice within that is always trying to kindle that light, and I think that voice is
Hmm.
coming across through dreams and coming across, and it whispers. It's not shouting like the ego and the
Yeah,
fears
yeah.
and all these things uh, can be far louder. And there's practices that I feel you have to pull into your body to listen to where um, to listen to and discern
Hmm.
what is the dream maker or capital S self or
Hmm.
um, shadow and ego. It was quite interesting. I have not read the book, but I recently got pulled my attention to a book. I think it's by Robert Moore, and it was talking about kings, warriors, lovers, and magicians,
Hmm.
and the archetypes of the mature masculine,
Hmm.
um, and then its shadow counterpart and how that comes across and fears and thoughts. And it's just been quite interesting to observe because um, it seems like we've kind of lost a bit of those myths in the modern
Yeah.
culture. It's not no yeah, it's hard to embody a wise, mature king or warrior.
Hmm. Hmm.
And Anyway, that is a kind of offset there.
Hmm.
But yeah, what do you think in your book? There's keys, and I think this is where um, I've heard Chris Williams say like, "Does it grow corn?" But
Yeah.
like these toolkits, and I think you've called it an alchemical toolkit um, to some degree. But what are some of these keys that people can use to
Yeah.
yeah start to work with dreams in their life?
Well, so just to preface it, I think that
Mm,
because the dream carries a message from the unconscious, and the unconscious is always going to be other than consciousness, and to a certain extent, we're all somewhat defended against what's in the unconscious for good reason, because if we went through our life without a good kind of barrier between consciousness and unconscious, we'd be psychotic, and that
mm,
wouldn't work very well. So that tendency to sort of create a barrier between us and the unconscious that has, that there's some good sense to that. But of course, when it becomes too rigid, we lose the ability to have this very fruitful, fecund kind of interpenetration between consciousness and the unconscious. So we're somewhat defended against what comes up from the unconscious, and therefore it is very, very difficult to understand our own dreams. We're kind of um, perfectly predisposed not to understand them. So I work with dreams every single day. I, work with dreams in my analytic practice, work with dreams on my podcast. I probably, hear and work with, I don't know, 10 dreams a week or something like that. And when I wake up with a dream, I often think, I have no idea what this means. So, someone hands me a dream and I can kind of begin to work my way around it. And I have some thoughts and some questions and I feel pretty competent. But my own dreams, I'm like, I have no idea. And I think it's particularly difficult to work with your own dreams because it is bringing something that is at least different than consciousness, and often dreams pose a challenge to consciousness. So it's very, very difficult to hear. But I really wanted this to be a book that would help people work with their own dreams. So in some sense, the big hurdle to that is um, somehow getting popped out of your conscious attitude and being able to kind of see the other side. A lot of times people have dreams, they bring them in, they're coming to work with me for Jungian analysis. Part of what they want to do is dream work, but they'll bring a dream in and they'll say, well, I had this dream, but it wasn't very important. Or I had this
Mm.
dream, but I already know what it means. And, and I'm always like, wait, 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 wait. So, tell me the dream. And it's very obvious to me that they haven't understood it or that it's not unimportant, right? But there are these ways that when we wake with a dream, our conscious mind kind of wants to put it in a box or apply conscious attitudes to it or maybe diminish it a little bit. So the keys, there are 69 keys throughout the book. And the keys are really basically little prompts that you can apply to your own dreams that are meant to help you kind of see your back, as it were, but wait, did you think about it this way? Because
Mm.
we do this thing very, very quickly where we dismiss our own dreams.
And this barrier set up from us experiencing the full complexity of the unconscious and conscious. Do you think it's part of the Dreammaker or self to, like, when the time or the person is mature already, then that part of the unconscious gets revealed?
Yeah, I mean, I
Does that
think that
come
the
through in the dream, or is that
Dreammaker,
like, yeah?
yeah, I think the Dreammaker is always kind of giving you the medicine you need on sort of a daily basis. That's why a lot of dreams seem rather mundane. 'Cause it's just a little tweak. It's often about something going on in your life at that moment. Some dreams really pop in with these enormous themes, but for the most part, it's like, what's going on right now? What might you need to think about? And it's just a little nudge in the direction of wholeness and individuation. So it's um yeah, I think the Dreammaker usually stays very close to kind of where we are rather than most of the time not dealing with big global issues, but
Mm.
just sort of like, hey, here's something I noticed yesterday. You might want to take a look at this. Excuse me.
Yeah. I I'd love to talk about, because it's one that I find interesting, and it pops up in my dreams. And I came across a book by, what's his name? Edward Edinger. Um,
Mhm,
but part of the collective dream for me, and this does show up in the personal dreams at night, but it's also
mhm,
the impending uh apocalypse on the horizon. And I've got here that, the original Greek word of apocalypse means to uncover, to reveal what was hidden. And
mhm,
in the apocalypse, in this framing, is a symbolic encounter with the capital S self. And then it was also a note from there that he said, when symbols collapse, madness follows. So we
mhm,
live in a world stripped of myth. Techno-rationalism has amputated mystery. And without symbolic containers, ritual, religion, storytelling, we're defenseless against the raw voltage of the unconscious.
mhm,
Edinger called this symbolic impoverishment. When the symbolic life dies, archetypes don't go away, they go rogue. Because
mhm.
archetypes don't care about your belief systems, they're operating systems.
Yeah.
And I wanted to just touch on that because obviously dreams speak to us in a way that's non-linear. They speak in a symbology that there's a lot of similar frameworks to working with, I guess, psychedelic and plant medicine journeys, and then how to integrate this after. It's different but similar to dreams in many ways, that there's messages from an other,
Yeah.
and it's deeply symbolic and deeply cosmic at times, or of this world, or there's archetypes. Like we had a intensive in Costa Rica recently, and one of the ladies at the intensive was quite a high up coach for, I won't say, but like a big corporation that everyone has a phone of, and she was a Jungian analyst by trade, and in her psychedelic journey, she had Jung on her as her counsel, and Joseph Campbell, but also the mythic of the mother, and all these things. So, yeah, how important is it to start to work with symbols and myth, and hold that? Because I've really gone on a loop here, but I was trying to bring it back, but it's very hard because we hold this potential in time in our sphere. It's like
Yeah.
it's there, and it shows up in the personal dream, and it shows up in the collective. So how do we make meaning from this, and I guess start to affect the dream for the positive within ourselves and the collective?
Well, I love those quotes, by the way, that you read. I mean, I think that they capture something really deep and really important. I mean, apocalypse is an archetype, and in some sense, it is an archetype of a sort of the end of all things. But always, what happens after an apocalypse is there is a rebirth.
Mm,
And so we can have a kind of personal apocalypse where our frames of meaning, or some disaster befalls us, and the person that we knew ourselves to be kind of gets swept away. But it does make room for a new iteration, often along more expansive lines. I think, this kind of talking about loss of traditional frames of meaning and the disappearance of symbols, I don't know that they ever quite disappear. They may disappear from the culture, but they will be regenerated again by the collective unconscious. I mean, that's the nature of the collective unconscious, is that it is a symbol generating system.
mm.
So, and I think, that's the interesting thing about dreams, and also I'm sure with plant medicine, that the images that come up are these universal archetypal images. So, in your dreams, you may have, I worked with a woman once who had this spectacular dream of this Aztec goddess that she knew
Mm.
nothing about. But when we worked on the dream together, we found this reference to this goddess. So it's sort of like all of these images of meaning exist, and we have access to them through the collective unconscious in a process that's quite mysterious. And they will be, the nature of an archetypal image is that it will be uh, renewed and regenerated constantly throughout time. So those images and symbols, await and are there to kind of elucidate our experience that may seem to be disconnected from any other frames of meaning, but it's connected to something.
Yeah, it, the way I view it at times is I think spirit is so multi, and capital G God, and spirit is so
Mm.
multi-dimensional that it kind of can meet you. And so whether you view that as a collective unconscious symbol or something else, it can meet you through symbol to explain or try hint at the ineffable,
Mhm.
um, and the inexplicable, but it's done best through the complexity of a symbol. And
Mhm.
so it was really beautiful because I've been speaking to this lady quite a bit because we got on really well at this
Mm-hmm.
plant medicine retreat as part of our coaching training. And, a big part of her work, because there is currently this psychedelic renaissance, for lack of well, it's actually a good term. But, I think there's this resurgence in time for this call back to a medicinal path, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a path full of mystery, dream, wonder, all these kind of things. But a big part of her thing was that integration is lost because it leaves you feeling, like you said, like the self dies and you go through a
Mm-hmm.
mini apocalypse or self death,
Mm-hmm.
or and then there's a resurrection to the new self, and the old parts have to be let go of or integrated or um, embodied in a higher way. But what's lost in the current cultural myth around integration is that sharing that story around a fire, the circle,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
The actual coming back, and this was my story shared in a story. I don't quite like, it's really hard to put my finger on, but I feel it's like a very interesting overlaps between the Jungian lens of stuff and
Mm-hmm.
what's happening on the quite a big scale with these psychedelic medicines having a
Yes.
major
Yeah.
comeback.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I guess to pull into integration of dreams, how do you feel? Um, yeah, if you've just heard of dream work, this is the first time. How could you start working with your dreams today?
Yeah. Well, I think the most important thing is to value them. And one of the ways to value them is to get yourself a journal and put it by your bed and write down whatever you remember in the morning, even if it's little, even if it's just a snippet, even if it seems strange or it doesn't make any sense, just write it down. And as you do that more and more, you will remember more dreams. And it's important just to write them down. What I try to do is I write down on as many dreams as I can remember every night, and then about once a week I set aside a time to work with a dream that was particularly impactful.
Hmm.
I can't work with all my dreams. I don't have the time for that. Um, so you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to capture every single dream in all of its detail. You don't have to try to interpret every single dream. But if you pay attention, if you turn toward them, if you write them down, if you get curious about them, if you value them, they can be such a source of wisdom. There's a wonderful practice called dream incubation, which is where you can ask a question of your dream, a little bit like what you were talking about before, and the answers that can come through are so valuable. But it's really just about fostering that relationship. It's like any new person that you meet that you want to get to know better. You would make a point of letting that person know that you value them, and that when they call, you answer your phone, or at least you call them back. So we just want to kind of make friends with the Dreammaker.
And yeah, I'm aware we don't have too much time left. Is there any examples where you've seen a magical transformation within someone from like zero to dream work to insight to transformation?
Usually dream work is very much part of the rest of analysis, right? So we're not just talking about dreams, we're also talking about the person's life. We're looking at what the dreams are saying about the person's life. So sometimes it's a little hard to tease out. There was one person I worked with, and I'm going to have to be very vague because I don't want to discuss client material. But, I would say when we started working together, she had a number of pretty significant things going on, that were difficult. And for whatever reason, we did wind up almost exclusively talking about dreams. I would have to kind of push to hear about other things, but then I realized the dreams were really introducing all of the material that we need to work on, and it kind of pointed to current issues, and also brought up issues in the past that we needed to talk about, and the dreams just kept on leading us right to what we needed to talk about. And in a fairly short amount of time, her life really changed for the better a lot in in concrete ways. I mean, I definitely have arrived at a place where I think that if you're going to do a depth psychological work, um, yes, you can certainly expect the goal would be that you would feel happier, more alive, that things would be better in your outer life as well. Sometimes, we have an ego agenda, and that is just not going to be we have to let our ego agenda go, but at the same time, a lot of times when you come in for a process like this, including dream work, the point is that life gets a little better, and maybe you feel a little bit renewed and enlivened.
Yeah, that's that. I think it's that anthropos. Like when there's the kind of birth catharsis, like the expression of the vibration. You go through these ecstatic peak experiences that can come through death, and then bringing
Mhm.
that through to a community, and then there's this rebirth into, and that can happen in a day or in a container or a lifetime.
Mm.
So it's
Mhm.
really, and through dreams. So yeah, just if people wanted to listen to you or read your book, contact or work with you, I don't know if you want to just leave any
Mhm.
information for
Yeah.
how
Well, my
best to work with you.
podcast is thisjungianlife.com, and you can read about the book there too. And my author website, my personal author website is lisamarchiano.com, and you can read about my other books there and my other offerings as well.
Thank you so much.